Hello, everybody. It's great to be here in the city of ideas. The world, obviously, at this point in time has changed drastically in the last 30 years, so I'm going to speak very, very quickly about this. The first thing I'm going to speak about, though, is my subject of heart here, which is design. And what is design? Design is shaping the entire built environment. In fact, design is about every human experience possible, because every object you touch, which, by the way, we engage or touch approximately 600-700 objects every day, every one of us. So you can imagine how these objects have a huge impact on our daily lives, on our emotions, on our mental psyche, on our physical and functional and physiological, spiritual and experiential world that we live in. Design is taking contemporary criteria. This is the real definition. I'm going to be a little bit pedantic. And we take contemporary criteria to shape the future. So for example, if I design a mobile phone, obviously I'm dealing with the latest technologies, the latest materials, the latest interface. If I'm developing the interface itself, I'm dealing with the, let's say, most prescient way of interfacing in order for telecommunications. So when I design a mobile phone, it's a contemporary object. And in turn, I shape the next, let's say, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years of behaviors. So design is not at all, in this regard, about looking in the past. Design is about working with contemporary criteria to shape the future. If I design a polymer chair today, I would take a chair and think about the client, the market, the distribution of the object, the material of the object. If I have to make an inexpensive chair, I'd probably think of a polymer that's very inexpensive to use. It could be something like a polypropylene, because it's a, how can I say, a responsible polymer, because if I burn it, I just get vapor. Or I could think about even a better polymer today, which may be something that's completely biodegradable. In fact, I just finished in Brazil a chair, a plastic chair, that's made from and derived from sugar instead of using petroleum. And all our polymers are actually going to shift, and we're going to be using polymers that are derived from natural resources versus petroleum. So then I'm designing a chair, and I say, okay, I'm going to design a nice plastic chair. And what am I going to do with this chair? I'm going to make it lightweight, easy, soft to pick up, super comfortable. I may think about the age that we live in today, which is the age of casualism, meaning that when we sit in a chair, we don't sit like we sat in a chair 30, 40 years ago. We don't sit upright anymore. We tend to kind of slouch a little more. So maybe I designed a chair that's a little more inclined. If I make it of a polymer that's a little bit flexible, my body moves, hence I'll be more comfortable in it for a longer period of time. I could make that polymer with all kinds of additives, so that chair could be transparent or translucent. It could glow in the dark. It could even change color due to my body heat. There's all kinds of things I could do today in the material world, in the technological world, that would make a chair that speaks about today. When we look at history of humanity, we dissect it and understand it due to our artifacts, all the effigies of objects that existed for tens of thousands of years. So if we take, for example, a vase from the Ming Dynasty and we pull it out of the ground and we brush it off and we study it, we understand the social life of the time, we understand the religion of the time, we understand the technology of the time. In other words, that object represented or marked a moment in history. So when we design, we do the same thing. We're marking the time in which we live. That's what design is. But design is misunderstood, because a lot of people think that design is style. And style is not about using contemporary criteria. Style is about looking into history. So when we think about history and we dissect history, we say, well, it's interesting that we look at a movement, that when a movement ends, we call it a style. So if we think about, I don't know, the Renaissance style, the Baroque style, the Belle Epoque style, the classical style, neoclassical style, brutalist style, modernist style. These are all periods that have basically ended. And the way we understand the chronology of our human existence is through these styles. So you say, well, today, as I'm working, in this day and age I'm working in, what is the style of the moment? There is no style of the moment, because we're actually within a specific movement. If I had to call the movement that we're in right now something, I would probably call it maybe the data-driven movement. Or I'd call it the digital movement, or the digital age movement, something to the extent of the fact that for the first time in history, that we know of humanity in the last 50,000 years, we live in the digital age. In other words, binary notation 0 and 1 for 40 years now has created one common global language and is completely shaping a new human experience, an experience like we've never had before. The way we had experiences, the way we understood our history was through physicality, through materiality. But in the last 40 years, things are shifting. All of a sudden, we're having more and more and more heightened experiences with less, through a dematerialization. And in fact, I think we're at this kind of cusp, a kind of turning point where we're kind of confused about how we deal and embrace and engage the digital age. The analog age, let's say it's 100,000 years old, it's the length of the stage. Then the digital age is smaller than this little pink piece of tape here. Meaning, we're just at the beginning. We are what I call the Bioneers of the digital age. This is all new for us. And this is actually causing a kind of, let's say, a dystropic condition in humanity right now. Because the way we understood and experienced the world was physical. Now we're experiencing and embracing and engaging the world in an intangible way. So there's a big, big turning point. But at the same time, if I look back and I say, OK, I'm going to not design, but I'm actually going to style, what do I do to style? I look back into history and I say, oh, somebody comes to me and says, we would like you to design a hotel that's Belle Epoque-like. The minute they say Belle Epoque-like, or Whittingale-like, or Mission-like, or something, that means I'm going to look back at that period of history and supposedly be inspired by it. Now, I don't believe to look back, especially when you look back in imagery, that you can be really inspired. If anything, you're appropriating, and if anything, you are derivative of something that took place before in history. Whereas design is really shaping a future, because it's something that doesn't exist at this moment in time. Now, so that's a difficult place to cross boundaries in, because as you draw and work, and as I think, and I try to kind of speak about the age in which I live, inevitably, if I'm shaping a physical world, I still will fall back into, let's say, the needs and desires that we have physically. I.e., if I do a chair today, it's quite difficult to design a chair that really is original. You know, and the reason I say chair you could argue is kind of the architectural icon or model of every designer in the world, an architect who would love to design an original chair. And let's talk about originality for a second. So the question is then, well, can I design something original in the physical world and the age I live in? If you do something original today, you're one of 7.8 billion people. So in other words, if you wake up tomorrow morning and you have original thought, and we all have original thought. Why we all have original thought is because we're all completely original. That's why we all have a different fingerprint, which is only repeated once out of 30 billion, or an original iris, 1 out of 10 billion. If you have an original thought, but, as Heidegger says, to be is to build, you manifest that thought, that originality. Then you're one of 7.8 billion. But you're not only one of 7.8 billion people, you're actually one of the history of humanity. And history of humanity, estimate, 170 billion people. So every morning, what gets me up in the morning is to do something original. And my first thought when I wake up in the morning is, can I do something original in this world? And if I'm going to do something original, if I have an idea, if I'm going to create, what's going to inspire me? Well, I won't go and look into the past. Why? Because besides the fact that the past has been done, and the past is pointless, and we don't need more, and you could argue in the material world, we actually right now need less and less and less, I need to look in the present. And there's a saying that I heard years and years and years ago that artists, they don't see the future. They see the present, everybody else sees the past. So I made it a kind of a personal doctrine in a way that I only will engage the present and exist and live and be in the present. And this is the way I'm inspired. And this is the way I try to find original thought and have original ideas. Now, the world around us has been designed in 2 dimensions. So you can imagine for a good few thousand years, all the way back to the pyramids and Babylon, we designed in 2D. We saw the world two-dimensionally. In fact, we all know that we only, for the first time, started to document 3 dimensions was during the Renaissance. This is, I find amazing, actually. For thousands of years, somebody couldn't look at this audience and realize that the people back there are much smaller than the people in front and somehow depict that on paper. It's kind of amazing, actually, that we didn't see that. But anyway, we designed in 2 dimensions, and the 2 dimensions created this 3D world we live in. So this Cartesian world we live in, and let me say why I say it's Cartesian, because everything is based on a matrix. The Android system and iOS system is a matrix, a grid. In fact, I was designing a new mobile phone in Israel a few years ago, and we made a phone that was an oval, beautiful little thing. It was oval, flat little screen. We could not produce it because you can cut the LCD display in an oval, but then inevitably, one of those operating systems is going to give you a rectangle image. So this is the Cartesian world we live in. If I design a credit card for Citibank, it's a rectangle. Why? Because it has to go into 1.6 million ATM machines around the world that take a rectangle. If I design a kitchen for Italians, Russians, I make many kitchens, they end up inevitably becoming a grid to fit into a condominium that's also a grid to maximize square footage in the built environment. And it goes on and on and on. So if I design a refrigerator for LG Electronics, it's a grid that's 60 by 90 or 60 by 60, 60 by 120 to fit into that kitchen. Likewise, if I do something Gorenje and I do a stovetop, the same thing keeps happening. So basically, we're kind of, in a sense, you could argue, kind of imprisoned by the Cartesian grid. And where did this come from? The Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was simple. The first machine to cut a piece of material was a bandsaw. So you cut things straight. And when you cut things straight and fast, you make them cheap. So inevitably, our architecture became a plethora of components of Cartesian grids: acoustic tiles, acoustic floor panels, acoustic pieces, floor panels, carpets, carpet tiles, grids of marble, onward and onward and onward. So we created this Cartesian world. But 15 years ago, there was a big turning point. In fact, it's older than 15 years ago. When Alias Wavefront came out, we started to develop 3D programs that we could actually design in 3D, not in 2D. So we looked at the world this way: top, bottom, side, front, section, elevation. Hence our cities, more or less, the facades were concerned as elevation. All of a sudden, we start designing in 3D. When we start shaping in 3D, we start looking at the world dimensionally as we are. And we're 3-dimensional. And in fact, we're organic. We're asymmetrical. A straight line doesn't exist in nature. So here we were fighting nature for the last 10,000 years. We're opposing nature by trying to make a Cartesian world. So we start shaping a 3D world. And in turn, we start shaping a 3D world, what happens? Our technologies and our softwares and rapid prototyping machines and fused deposition machines and new technologies have afforded us to start to build a much more organic, much more amorphous world. So it's not a tendency or a trend or a style that we start to see architecture, for example, that's amorphous. Because we've been doing it now for 30 years with products, and we make an object that fits in our hand, make a ski pole handle, and it's perfectly designed and ergonomic for one's hand. And in turn, inevitably, that's now moving into a macro scale. So from micro to macro, we're starting to shape a much more amorphous dimensional world, which means if I designed in 2D, because I was brought up in the analog world and taught in the analog world, and I designed in 2D, and that gave me 3D, if I design in 3D, it's going to give me 4D. And what is 4D? Fourth dimension is time. Fourth dimension is human experience. So in other words, we will shape better human experiences by creating a fourth dimensional world. And the fourth dimension at this point in time, from a design perspective, is already existing because it is the digital age. The digital age that's affording us the connectivity, that's affording us a borderless world, that's affording us empowerment of the individual, it's affording us empowerment of creativity. Next thing you know, everybody's participating, everybody's creative. Last thing I'll say, why? Because we're all born to create. To be is to create. Hence, 99.99% of humanity, the brain is ready to have original thought and to create something original. So every one of us can contribute to this new world because now we're empowered to be individual, and we're empowered to have a voice, and we're empowered to disseminate our work, and we're empowered to tell the world what we are capable of. Hence, why every creative profession right now is exponentially growing. More industrial designers and graphic designers and architects and illustrators and musicians and poets and writers and onward and onward and onward, because the digital age has afforded us these tools and created a democratic platform where we all have the same equality to enter the world and tell the world what we're all capable of. So basically, to be is to create. Thank you.